The train whistle pierced the air with its shrill cry as Garrett Palmer squinted against the harsh midday sun of Promise Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1875. His weathered Stetson cast a shadow over eyes that had seen too much for a man of 30. The platform of the dusty train station felt like an executioner's stand, as curious onlookers gathered to witness the spectacle a mail-order bride arriving for old man Wilson, who died 3 weeks prior, leaving no one to claim the woman who'd traveled across the country to marry a ghost. "Ain't right," muttered Sheriff Davis beside him. "That poor girl's gonna step off that train with nowhere to go and no one to meet her." Garrett adjusted his worn leather vest, his calloused fingers brushing against the telegram in his pocket. The message had arrived yesterday. A young woman named Josephine Summers was arriving on the noon train, expecting to meet her betrothed. No one had the heart to send word that Wilson had passed. "Train's coming in, Palmer," called the station master. "What are you planning to do about the girl?" Garrett's jaw tightened. "Don't rightly know yet." The iron beast rumbled into the station, belching steam and cinders as it ground to a halt. Garrett had faced down rustlers and outlaws without flinching, but the thought of confronting some Eastern lady with news that would shatter her future made his stomach knot. Passengers began to disembark a businessman in a fine suit, a family with 3 children, 2 elderly women. Then she appeared in the doorway, hesitating at the top of the steps. She wasn't what he expected, not plain or desperate-looking like he'd imagined. Her simple blue traveling dress couldn't hide her slender figure, and when she removed her bonnet to scan the platform, sunlight caught in her auburn hair. Josephine Summers clutched a small valise and a letter, her green eyes searching the faces on the platform with growing uncertainty. The look of hope on her face slowly fading to confusion made something twist in Garrett's chest. The whispers started immediately. "That's her. Poor thing. Wilson's bride. What'll happen to her now?" Before he could think better of it, Garrett stepped forward. Their eyes met across the platform, and in that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. "She's mine," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, striding toward her with purpose. "Josephine," the crowd fell silent, stunned by his declaration. Even the sheriff's mouth hung open in shock. Josephine's brow furrowed as this tall stranger approached her, confusion evident on her face. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Garrett reached her, tipping his hat respectfully. Up close, he could see the freckles dusting her nose and the wariness in her eyes. "No, madam, you don't," he said quietly so only she could hear. "But your intended Mr. Wilson passed 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick. Nobody thought to send word." Her face paled and her grip tightened on her valise until her knuckles whitened. "I see," she whispered, her voice steady despite the shock in her eyes. "And you are Garrett Palmer. I own a ranch outside of town." He glanced at the curious onlookers. "Everyone's watching. You've got no family here, no prospects. The boarding house is full, and this town ain't always kind to women alone." Understanding dawned in her eyes as she assessed her situation. "And you're offering, what exactly, Mr. Palmer?" "A proposition. Come to my ranch. I need a housekeeper, and you need somewhere to stay until you figure out your next move. You'll have your own room, proper pay, and my protection." He lowered his voice further. "Otherwise, you'll be stranded here with no money and nowhere to go." Josephine surveyed the crowd of strangers, watching them with undisguised curiosity. Some faces showed pity, others something more predatory. Her chin lifted slightly. "That's very charitable of you, Mr. Palmer," she said, matching his hushed tone. "But why announce to everyone that I'm yours?" His weathered face remained impassive. "Because in Promise Creek, a woman alone is seen as fair game. My claim will keep trouble at bay." She studied him for a long moment, weighing her limited options with a pragmatism that surprised him. "Very well, Mr. Palmer," she finally said, offering her hand. "It seems I am in need of employment and you are in need of a housekeeper." Garrett took her hand, feeling the softness of her skin against his calluses. "Call me Garrett, Miss Summers." "Josephine," she corrected. "If I am to be yours in the eyes of the town, we should at least be on a first-name basis." For the first time that day, Garrett's lips quirked into something resembling a smile. He took her valise and offered his arm, which she accepted with a grace that belied her precarious situation. As they walked through the parting crowd, Sheriff Davis intercepted them. "Palmer, what in tarnation do you think you're doing?" "Taking my housekeeper home, Sheriff," Garrett replied evenly. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to Miss Summers here why no one bothered to inform her that Wilson had passed." The sheriff had the decency to look ashamed. "Just making sure the lady knows what she's getting into." "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff," Josephine said with remarkable composure. "But Mr. Palmer has been forthright about my situation and his offer. I've accepted employment at his ranch until I can make other arrangements." Davis removed his hat, revealing a balding head. "My condolences on Wilson, madam. He was a good man." "Thank you," she replied politely, though Garrett noted she showed no grief for a man she'd never met. They continued toward Garrett's wagon parked at the edge of the station. He helped her up onto the wooden seat, aware of how the entire town seemed to be watching them. "I hope you realize what you've done," Josephine said quietly as he climbed up beside her. "Your reputation may suffer for this." Garrett took up the reins. "My reputation can handle it. Yours is what matters now." He clicked his tongue and the horses pulled away from the station. As they left town behind, Garrett felt the weight of the woman beside him, not her physical presence, but the responsibility he'd just taken on. He wasn't sure what had possessed him to claim Wilson's abandoned bride, but something about her courage in the face of disaster had struck a chord. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch," he said, breaking the silence between them. "Hope you don't mind getting a bit dusty." Josephine adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "Mr. Palmer Garrett, I grew up on a farm in Ohio. Dust and I are well acquainted." That surprised him. Her refined manner had led him to assume she was a city girl. "What made you answer Wilson's advertisement?" Her expression grew distant. "My parents died last winter. The farm was sold to pay their debts. I had few options." She straightened her shoulders. "I chose the one that offered the most independence." Marrying a stranger offered independence. He couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "More than becoming a poor relation to my uncle's family or taking a position as a companion to some demanding dowager." Her green eyes met his. "Mr. Wilson's letters were kind. He wrote of needing a partner, not a servant. He offered land and a future I could help build." Garrett nodded, understanding. Land was freedom in a way city folk couldn't comprehend. "I'm sorry about Wilson," he said. "He was a decent man." "So everyone keeps saying," she replied with a slight smile. "Though I suspect people would say the same even if he weren't." Garrett chuckled despite himself. "You might be right about that." As the wagon rolled through the sagebrush-dotted landscape, Josephine took in the vast openness of Wyoming Territory. The endless sky arched overhead, a deeper blue than she'd ever seen in Ohio. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Intimidating, but beautiful. It can be harsh," Garrett warned. "Winters are brutal, summers are scorching, spring brings floods, and autumn brings early snow, but there's something about this land that gets into your blood. You sound like you love it here." "I do." He adjusted his hat against the glare. "Came west after the war. Couldn't settle back east after what I'd seen." "You fought for the Union?" she asked. He nodded. "3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry. My father and brothers fought. Father came home, my brothers didn't." They fell silent again, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to the turbulence of the day. "I should tell you about the ranch," Garrett said eventually. "It's not large compared to some, but it's good land. I run about 300 head of cattle. Got 4 hands working for me: Tom, Lewis, Henry, and Caleb. They bunk in the bunkhouse about a quarter-mile from the main house." "And the main house? 2 stories. 4 bedrooms upstairs, kitchen, parlor, and my office downstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's solid. Built it myself." Josephine nodded, absorbing this information. "And my duties would include cooking, cleaning, looking after the house. The men usually take care of themselves, but they wouldn't turn down a good meal now and then. And your personal needs?" She asked directly, her cheeks flushing slightly despite her businesslike tone. Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. "I said housekeeper, Miss Summers, and I meant it. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door. My personal needs are not part of your duties." Relief flashed across her face before she composed herself. "I appreciate your clarification. In my experience, men's words and expectations don't always align." "Not in my house," he said firmly. The road began to climb slightly, winding through rocky outcroppings. In the distance, a sprawling valley opened up before them, green with spring growth. Nestled in the center was a large timber house with several outbuildings clustered nearby. "Palmer Ranch," Garrett announced, a note of pride in his voice. Been working this land for 7 years now. Josephine leaned forward, taking in the sight of what would be her temporary home. The house was larger than she'd expected, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Smoke curled from the chimney, and several horses grazed in a corral nearby. "It's impressive," she said honestly. "You built all this in 7 years. Started with a one-room cabin and worked my way up," he replied. "Had to prove up the homestead claim first, then expanded when I could." As they approached, Josephine noticed a tall, lanky man exit the barn and watch their arrival with evident curiosity. "That's Tom," Garrett explained. "My foreman, good man, been with me 5 years." He guided the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Before he could climb down, Tom had approached, his weathered face openly curious. "Didn't expect you back so soon, boss," he said, his eyes shifting to Josephine. "Madam," he added with a respectful nod. "Tom, this is Miss Josephine Summers," Garrett said, helping her down from the wagon. "She'll be working as our housekeeper." Understanding dawned in Tom's eyes. "Wilson's bride," Josephine straightened her shoulders. "I was to be, yes." "Unfortunately, circumstances have changed." Tom removed his hat. "Sorry for your loss, madam." "Thank you," she replied politely. "Miss Summers will be staying in the east bedroom," Garrett continued. "Would you ask Lewis to bring her trunk up when it arrives? The station master will send it along." "Course, boss." Tom turned to Josephine. "Welcome to Palmer Ranch, Miss Summers. It'll be nice having a woman's touch around the place." Garrett led Josephine up the porch steps and opened the heavy wooden door. The interior was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's home. The furnishings were simple but sturdy, and though it lacked feminine touches, everything was clean and orderly. "Kitchen's through there," Garrett said, pointing. "Parlor's here. My office is behind that door. Bedrooms are upstairs." Josephine took it all in, mentally cataloging what she had to work with. "It's a fine home, Mr. Palmer. Needs a woman's touch, as Tom said," Garrett admitted. "Never had much time for decorating." He led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom with a large window overlooking the valley. A sturdy bed with a plain quilt, a dresser, and a washstand comprised the furnishings. "This would be your room," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "There's a key in the drawer if you want it." Josephine set her valise on the bed and moved to the window, taking in the view. After the upheaval of the day, the sight of the vast landscape brought an unexpected sense of peace. "I'll leave you to settle in," Garrett said. "Supper's usually at 6. Don't worry about cooking tonight, we'll manage." "No need," Josephine turned from the window. "I'm perfectly capable of preparing a meal. It would be good to start as I mean to go on." Garrett studied her for a moment, seeming to reassess her yet again. "As you wish. Kitchen's stocked reasonably well. If you need anything, just ask." When he left, Josephine sank onto the bed, the enormity of her situation finally hitting her. She had traveled across the country to marry a man she'd never met, only to discover he was dead. Now she was in the home of another stranger, dependent on his charity thinly disguised as employment. She allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to feel the fear and uncertainty. Then, with the practicality that had seen her through her parents' deaths and the loss of her childhood home, she rose and began to unpack the few belongings in her valise. Her new life at Palmer Ranch had begun, for better or worse. The kitchen proved to be well equipped, if somewhat disorganized. Josephine spent the afternoon familiarizing herself with the layout and preparing a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie made from preserved apples she found in the pantry. At precisely 6 o'clock, Garrett entered the kitchen, stopping short at the sight of the laid table and the aroma of home cooking. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said, removing his hat. "It's no trouble. It's what you're paying me for," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Will the men be joining us? They usually eat at the bunkhouse, but..." He glanced at the ample portions she'd prepared. "I could call them over if you'd like." Josephine nodded. "Please do, I'd like to meet everyone." Soon, the kitchen was filled with the presence of 4 ranch hands who entered with varying degrees of awkwardness, each nodding respectfully to Josephine. Tom she'd already met. Luis Rodriguez was a compact man with a ready smile. Henry Williams was older, with graying hair and a quiet demeanor. Caleb Johnson was the youngest, barely 20, with freckles and an open, friendly face. "Madam," Henry said, speaking for the group, This is mighty kind of you. We don't often get cooking this fine." "It's my pleasure," Josephine replied, gesturing for them to sit. "Please, eat before it gets cold." The meal passed with the men initially maintaining a careful politeness, clearly uncertain how to behave with a woman present. Gradually, as Josephine asked questions about the ranch and their work, they began to relax. "Been a long time since the boss invited us to the main house for supper," Lewis commented, helping himself to more cornbread. "Don't get used to it," Garrett said, though his tone lacked bite. "Miss Summers," Caleb ventured, "if you don't mind me asking, where did you learn to cook like this?" "This stew is better than my ma's, and that's saying something," Josephine smiled at the young man. "I grew up cooking for my father and brothers on our farm. When you're feeding hungry men who have been working since dawn, you learn quickly what satisfies." "Well, we're mighty grateful," Tom said. "Usually it's beans and whatever else we can throw in the pot." After the meal, the men thanked her again and returned to the bunkhouse, leaving Josephine and Garrett alone. She began to clear the table, but he stopped her. "Leave the dishes. You've done enough for your first day." "I don't mind. Tomorrow's soon enough to establish routines," he insisted. "We should talk about your situation." He led her to the parlor, where a fire burned low in the hearth against the evening chill. They sat in chairs facing each other, the flickering light casting shadows on the walls. "I want to be clear about what happens next," Garrett began. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need to sort things out. I meant what I said about the housekeeper position, but I don't expect you to remain here indefinitely." Josephine appreciated his directness. "What do you suggest?" "You have options. You could return east if that's what you want. Or there's the teaching position that's opening in town come fall. Miss Henderson is getting married and moving to Cheyenne." "You've given this some thought," she observed. Garrett shifted in his chair. "It seemed the decent thing to do. And if I chose to stay on as your housekeeper," something flickered in his eyes, "then that would be your choice. The position is yours for as long as you want it." Josephine studied him in the firelight. Garrett Palmer was not what she had expected to find in Wyoming. He was handsome in a rugged way, with his dark hair and strong features, but it was his sense of honor that intrigued her most. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured. He nodded warily. "Why did you claim me at the station?" "The truth, please." Garrett was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "When I saw you standing there, looking lost but trying hard not to show it, I couldn't bear the thought of what might happen to you. This territory isn't always kind to women alone." "That explains offering help, not publicly claiming me as yours." His jaw tightened. "In Promise Creek, there are men who would see a stranded woman as an opportunity. My claim ensures they'll keep their distance." "I see." She folded her hands in her lap, and there was no personal interest in your decision. Garrett met her gaze directly. "Miss Summers, Josephine, I won't deny you're a beautiful woman, but I made my offer out of decency, not desire. I've no intention of taking advantage of your situation." His honesty was refreshing. "Thank you for that. And for everything else." "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said softly. "They wouldn't have. I've learned that lesson well." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "It's getting late," Garrett finally said, rising. "You must be tired after your journey." Josephine stood as well. "Yes, it's been quite a day. If you need anything during the night, my room is at the end of the hall." "Thank you. Good night, Garrett." "Good night, Josephine." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Josephine couldn't help wondering what twist of fate had brought her to this place, to this man. She had come west seeking a husband and found herself instead in the strange position of being claimed but not wanted, protected but not possessed. It was not the future she had imagined, but as she gazed out her window at the star-filled sky, she felt an unexpected sense of possibility. Perhaps, just perhaps, this detour in her carefully laid plans might lead somewhere worth going. Dawn broke over Palmer Ranch with a chorus of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Josephine woke to unfamiliar sounds and took a moment to orient herself. The events of yesterday came rushing back, and she sat up, determined to make herself useful. She dressed quickly in a simple brown skirt and white blouse, pinning her hair in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, suggesting Garrett had already left for his morning chores. The kitchen became her domain as she stoked the stove and set about preparing breakfast. She found coffee beans and ground them, savoring the rich aroma that filled the kitchen. Biscuits were next, followed by bacon and eggs. By the time footsteps sounded on the porch, she had a hearty meal waiting. Garrett entered, looking surprised to find her already busy at work. "You're up early." "Farm habits die hard," she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "I thought you might appreciate breakfast before you start your day." He accepted the cup gratefully. "I could get used to this." "Sit." "Everything's ready." Garrett washed his hands at the pump sink and took a seat at the table. Josephine served him a plate piled with food, then fixed a smaller portion for herself and joined him. "This is good," he said after taking a bite of the flaky biscuits. "Really good. Thank you." "I had an excellent teacher in my mother." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Garrett spoke again. "I need to ride out to check on the north pasture today. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course. I have plenty to keep me busy." She gestured around the kitchen. "I thought I'd give everything a thorough cleaning to start," he nodded. "Do whatever you think needs doing. You'll find cleaning supplies in the pantry." After breakfast, Garrett left, and Josephine set to work with a vengeance. She scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed, reorganized the pantry, swept and dusted the parlor, and began an inventory of household supplies that needed replenishing. By midday, she had worked up a healthy appetite and paused to make herself a simple lunch. As she ate, she contemplated her situation with clear-eyed pragmatism. Garrett Palmer had saved her from an impossible position, but she couldn't rely on his charity forever. She needed to form a plan. The teaching position he'd mentioned was intriguing. She had a good education, having attended the local school in Ohio until she was 18. But that opportunity wouldn't be available until fall, months away. In the meantime, she would make herself indispensable as a housekeeper, and she would save every penny of her wages against future need. The afternoon was spent tackling the bedrooms. She changed linens, swept floors, and dusted surfaces, leaving Garrett's room for last out of respect for his privacy. His chamber was Spartanly neat, with few personal possessions visible. A framed daguerreotype on the dresser caught her attention, a younger Garrett in a Union Army uniform, standing beside another soldier who bore a family resemblance. "My brother James." Josephine startled at Garrett's voice from the doorway. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "You weren't." He entered the room and picked up the frame. "We enlisted together. He didn't come home." "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. Garrett set the picture down carefully. "It was a long time ago, Gettysburg." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken grief. Josephine understood all too well the hollow spaces left by war. "My brothers, Thomas and Edward, died at Antietam," she offered. "Father never really recovered, though he lived another decade." Garrett's eyes met hers, recognition of shared loss passing between them. "The war took too many good men." "Yes, it did." She smoothed her apron, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy. "I should finish here and start supper." "Actually," Garrett said, "I came to tell you that we're invited to town tonight. Sheriff Davis's wife is hosting a social at their home." "She specifically asked me to bring you." Josephine frowned. "Is that wise, given the circumstances of my arrival?" "It's necessary," he replied. "People will talk regardless. Better to face them directly than hide away and let rumors fester." She saw the logic in his reasoning. "Very well." "What time should we leave?" 6 o'clock. "It's nothing formal, but—" He hesitated. "Wear whatever you'd normally wear to church." After he left, Josephine opened her trunk, which had arrived that morning. Her wardrobe was modest but respectable. She selected a blue dress with white trim that was her Sunday best and laid it out on the bed. The prospect of facing the town's scrutiny was daunting, but she straightened her shoulders. She had endured worse than curious stares and wagging tongues. Besides, she was curious about the community that might become her home. At precisely 6 o'clock, she descended the stairs to find Garrett waiting in the parlor. He had changed into a clean shirt and his best vest, and had even attempted to tame his unruly hair. The sight of him made her pause momentarily. "You look nice," he said, a hint of appreciation in his eyes. "Thank you, so do you." She smoothed her skirts nervously. "I must admit I'm a bit apprehensive about tonight." "Just be yourself," he advised, helping her with her shawl. "Martha Davis is a kind woman, and anyone who's unkind will answer to me." The ride into town was pleasant in the cooling evening air. Josephine found herself enjoying Garrett's company as he pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local history. He was knowledgeable and articulate, revealing an educated mind behind his cowboy exterior. Promise Creek looked different in the evening light. The main street was lined with buildings ranging from rough wooden structures to more substantial brick establishments. A church steeple rose at one end, while the saloon anchored the other, a fitting representation of the town's dual nature. The Davis home was a tidy two-story house near the church. Several wagons and horses already lined the street outside, indicating they were not the first to arrive. "Ready?" Garrett asked as he helped her down from the wagon. Josephine took a steadying breath. "As I'll ever be." Martha Davis greeted them at the door, a plump, pleasant-faced woman with kind eyes. "Mr. Palmer, Miss Summers, I'm so glad you could come." She took Josephine's hands in hers. "My dear, we're all so sorry about Mr. Wilson. What a shock it must have been for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. It was unexpected, certainly." "Well, you're welcome in Promise Creek for as long as you choose to stay." "And Mr. Palmer," she turned to Garrett with a knowing smile, "it was very gallant of you to offer Miss Summers employment." Several heads turned at their entrance, and conversations momentarily paused before resuming with increased vigor. Josephine felt the weight of curious stares as Garrett guided her through the crowded parlor, introducing her to various townspeople. Most were welcoming, if curious. Dr. Miller and his wife expressed genuine sympathy for her situation. Mr. Hollister, who owned the general store, informed her that any supplies she needed for Palmer Ranch would be extended on credit. "Palmer's good for it," he said with a wink. "One of the few ranchers who always pays his bills on time." Josephine was introduced to so many people that their names began to blur together. She maintained her composure, answering questions about her journey and her background with as much honesty as propriety allowed. She was speaking with the minister's wife when she became aware of a conversation nearby. "Mighty convenient, don't you think?" a woman's voice said. "Wilson dies and Palmer suddenly has a pretty young woman in his house." "Hush, Agatha," another woman responded. "They'll hear you." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. No one's seen Palmer take an interest in any woman since he arrived in these parts. Now suddenly he's playing knight in shining armor. There's more to this story than meets the eye." Josephine felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. Before she could decide how to respond, Garrett appeared at her side, his expression indicating he'd overheard as well. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, addressing the gossip directly, "I believe you haven't met Miss Summers properly. Josephine, this is Agatha Thornton, whose husband owns the bank." Josephine gathered her dignity and extended her hand. "Mrs. Thornton, how lovely to meet you." The woman had the grace to look uncomfortable as she took Josephine's hand. "Miss Summers, welcome to Promise Creek." "Thank you, everyone has been so kind, offering help and sympathy." "It's refreshing to find such a charitable community." Mrs. Thornton's face reddened at the subtle rebuke. "Yes, well, we do our best." "Indeed you do," Garrett agreed, his tone deceptively pleasant. "Though sometimes our best falls short of Christian charity, doesn't it?" Before Mrs. Thornton could respond, Sheriff Davis called for everyone's attention. "Folks, Martha's laid out a fine spread in the dining room. Help yourselves." Garrett guided Josephine away from the embarrassed gossip. "I apologize for that," he murmured. "No need," she replied. "I've encountered women like Mrs. Thornton before. Their own lives are so empty they must fill them with speculation about others." He looked at her with newfound respect. "You handle yourself well. Necessity is an excellent teacher." The remainder of the evening passed more pleasantly. Josephine found herself genuinely enjoying conversations with several of the townswomen, particularly Martha Davis and the schoolteacher, Miss Henderson, who was eager to discuss the possibility of Josephine taking over her position in the fall. "The children are wonderful," Miss Henderson assured her. "Some are a bit rough around the edges, but they're eager to learn, and the town council pays a fair wage." "I'll certainly consider it," Josephine promised. "Though it's all happened so quickly, I haven't had time to make firm plans." As the evening wound down, Josephine found herself on the Davises' porch with Garrett, taking in the cool night air. "You made quite an impression," he commented. "Martha Davis is already planning to invite you to her sewing circle." Josephine smiled. "She's very kind, they all are mostly." "Small towns can be both the most welcoming and the most judgmental places on earth," Garrett observed. But I think you won over most of them tonight, including you. The question slipped out before she could stop it. In the lantern light, she saw surprise flicker across his face, followed by something warmer. I was already impressed when you didn't fall apart at the station yesterday. Tonight just confirmed my initial assessment, which was that Josephine Summers is a woman of remarkable character. The simple compliment touched her more deeply than flowery praise would have. Thank you. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before Garrett cleared his throat. We should head back. Morning comes early at the ranch. The ride home was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. The stars blazed overhead in a display impossible to see in more populated areas, and Josephine found herself marveling at their brilliance. It's beautiful, she said softly. One of the things I love most about this country, Garrett replied, makes a man feel small but in a good way. When they reached the ranch, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. Thank you for accompanying me tonight, she said, stepping back. Thank you for facing them all with such grace. They parted at the top of the stairs, each to their own room, but Josephine lay awake long after, replaying the events of the evening. Particularly the moment on the porch when Garrett had looked at her with something more than respect or concern in his eyes. She was being foolish, she told herself. Her situation was precarious enough without developing tender feelings for her employer. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with the image of serious gray eyes and the touch of strong hands at her waist. The following weeks settled into a comfortable routine. Josephine rose early each morning to prepare breakfast before Garrett and the hands began their day. She spent her hours cleaning, cooking, mending, and gradually adding small touches to make the house more homelike, wildflowers in a jar on the table. Curtains fashioned from fabric purchased at Hollister's store, a quilt she'd brought from Ohio draped over the back of the parlor settee. Garrett seemed to appreciate these changes, though he said little. She noticed, however, that he began spending more evenings in the parlor rather than retreating to his office after supper. Sometimes they would sit in companionable silence, he with a newspaper or ledger, she with her mending or a book from his surprisingly extensive library. Occasionally they would talk. She learned that he had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. He'd attended college for 2 years before the war interrupted his education. After losing his brother, he'd found it impossible to return to his former life and had headed west instead. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Ohio, her parents' farm, and her brothers who had never returned from war. She spoke of her brief engagement to a local boy who had jilted her when a wealthier prospect appeared, and how that betrayal had hardened her resolve to forge her own path. "Is that why you answered Wilson's advertisement?" Garrett asked one evening. "To get as far away as possible, partly," she admitted. "But also because his letters showed a respect that I found appealing. He wrote of wanting a partner, someone to build a life with. It seemed honest." Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "Wilson was a straightforward man, not one for pretense. Like you," she observed. His eyes met hers across the room. "I try to be." Something shifted between them in those quiet evening conversations, a gradual easing from employer and employee to something that felt increasingly like friendship. Perhaps more, though neither acknowledged it openly. Josephine also began to form connections in town. Martha Davis had indeed invited her to join the sewing circle, which met weekly at different members' homes. Through these gatherings, she gained insights into the community and its dynamics. She learned that Garrett was respected but somewhat of an enigma to the townspeople. He was known for his fair dealings and willingness to help neighbors in need, but few could claim to know him well. "He keeps to himself, that one," Mrs. Miller confided during one meeting. "Been here 7 years and still a mystery." "That's not entirely true," Martha Davis countered. "He's just private, but you'll never find a more dependable man in a crisis." "Or a more handsome one," giggled Betsy Collins, the dressmaker's daughter. "If I were you, Miss Summers, I'd be setting my cap for him rather than thinking about teaching school." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Palmer is my employer, nothing more." The knowing looks exchanged around the circle suggested no one believed her, which was unsettling primarily because Josephine was beginning to doubt it herself. June bloomed into July, bringing scorching heat and the arduous work of summer on a cattle ranch. Garrett and his men spent long days in the saddle, returning exhausted and sunburned. Josephine found herself watching for his return each evening, worrying when he was late, and taking particular care with meals to restore his strength. She told herself it was simply concern for her employer's well-being, but the flutter in her stomach when he smiled his thanks belied that explanation. One sweltering afternoon, she was picking beans in the kitchen garden when she heard horses approaching. Looking up, she saw Garrett riding in with a young steer draped across his saddle. The animal was clearly injured, its leg dangling at an unnatural angle. Garrett dismounted and called to Lewis, who hurried over to help lower the steer to the ground. What happened? Josephine asked, approaching with her basket of beans. Found him caught in a washout, Garrett explained, wiping sweat from his brow. Leg's broken, but he's young, might heal if we can splint it properly. She set down her basket. What can I do? Garrett looked surprised by her offer. It's going to be messy work. I grew up on a farm, remember? I'm no stranger to animal injuries, he nodded. All right, we need clean cloths, some of that liniment in the barn, and strips of wood for the splint. For the next hour, Josephine worked alongside Garrett and Lewis, helping to clean the wound, hold the frightened animal still, and bind the splinted leg. Her skirts were mudded and her hands bloodied by the time they finished, but the young steer was resting more comfortably in a makeshift pen near the barn. You did well, Garrett said as they washed up at the pump. Most women would have stayed clear. I'm not most women, she replied, scrubbing dirt from beneath her nails. His eyes held hers. No, you certainly aren't. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might say more, might finally acknowledge the unspoken current that seemed to flow between them with increasing strength. Instead, he handed her a clean towel. Thank you for your help. You're welcome. She dried her hands, disappointment mingling with relief. Whatever was developing between them, neither seemed ready to name it. That evening, a thunderstorm broke the heat wave, rain lashing against the windows as lightning split the sky. Josephine sat in the parlor, mending one of Garrett's shirts by lamplight when he entered with an open bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Thought you might like a nightcap, he said, setting the glasses on the small table between their chairs. Storm like this calls for something warming. She set aside her mending. I don't usually partake, but I suppose a small one wouldn't hurt. He poured a finger of amber liquid into each glass, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending that now familiar warmth through her. To surviving the heat, he toasted. And the storm, she added, taking a tentative sip. The whiskey burned pleasantly down her throat, warming her from within. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain pound against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. There was something intimate about sharing this moment, as if the storm had created a private world where only they existed. I've been meaning to ask, Garrett said eventually. Are you still planning to take the teaching position? The question caught her off guard. I haven't decided. Miss Henderson has been very encouraging and I enjoy working with children. You'd be good at it, he acknowledged, studying the contents of his glass. The children would be fortunate to have you as their teacher. But, she prompted, sensing hesitation in his tone. Garrett looked up, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. But I've grown accustomed to having you here. The simple admission hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. I've grown accustomed to being here, she replied softly. Then stay. The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. Not as my housekeeper, as what, Garrett? Her heart hammered in her chest. He set his glass down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't have Wilson's way with words. I can't write pretty letters about partnerships and building futures together. I don't need pretty words. Good, because I'm not offering them. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that these past weeks have shown me what my life could be. With you in it, Josephine hardly dared breathe. Are you proposing? I reckon I am, he said with a rueful smile, though I'm making a mess of it. She couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. Yes, you are. His face fell slightly until she reached across and placed her hand over his. But I appreciate honesty over eloquence, she continued, and I think I would like to hear what exactly you're proposing. Garrett turned his hand to clasp hers. I'm proposing that you stay as my wife. I can't promise it will be easy. Ranch life never is. But I can promise to respect you, to value your thoughts and feelings, to work alongside you in building something worthwhile. And though I didn't plan on it, I find myself caring for you more deeply than I thought possible." Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes. It wasn't a declaration of passionate love from a romantic novel, but it was honest and real, like the man himself. "I came west seeking exactly what you're offering," she said, "a partnership based on mutual respect. I never expected to find it this way, but perhaps that makes it all the more precious." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope evident in his eyes. "It's a yes," she confirmed. "I will stay as your wife, Garrett Palmer." His smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual gravity and revealing a younger, less burdened man beneath. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I promise you won't regret it." The storm continued to rage outside, but within the warm circle of lamplight, Josephine felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since before the war took her brothers and changed her family forever. She had come west seeking a future and had found it in the most unexpected way with a man who had claimed her when no one else wanted her, only to discover she was precisely what he needed all along. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the Promise Creek Church, a simple ceremony attended by the ranch hands and various townspeople who had come to accept Josephine as one of their own. Martha Davis had helped with the preparations, and even Agatha Thornton had contributed a fine lace tablecloth as a wedding gift, perhaps in atonement for her earlier gossip. Josephine wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Cheyenne. Garrett, almost unrecognizable in a proper suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of wonder that made her heart swell. The minister spoke of commitment and partnership, of weathering life's storms together. When Garrett slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, sent from Pennsylvania after he wrote to his father of his impending marriage, Josephine felt the rightness of the moment with absolute clarity. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Palmer, you may kiss your bride." Garrett's kiss was gentle but firm, a promise sealed before witnesses. The cheers that erupted in the small church spoke of the community's approval and support. The celebration afterward at the Palmer Ranch was joyous, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung from trees. Lewis's wife had prepared traditional Mexican dishes to complement Josephine's pies and Martha Davis's fried chicken. Music from Tom's fiddle and Henry's harmonica filled the air as the sun set over the mountains. "Happy, Mrs. Palmer?" Garrett asked as they stood slightly apart from the festivities, his arm around her waist. "Very," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm still getting used to the name." "It suits you," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. As darkness fell and the last guests departed, Josephine felt a flutter of nervousness. Despite their growing closeness over the past weeks, they had maintained propriety, with Garrett never venturing beyond holding her hand or the occasional chaste kiss. Tonight would change that. Garrett seemed to sense her apprehension as they entered the house, now truly their shared home. "We don't have to rush anything," he said softly, closing the door behind them. Josephine gathered her courage. "I'm not afraid, just new to this." His expression softened. "So am I in many ways." The admission surprised her. "You've never." "I didn't say that," he clarified with a small smile. "But this marriage, a life together, is new territory for me." The honesty in his voice calmed her nerves. They were both navigating uncharted waters, learning together. Garrett offered his hand. "Shall we?" She placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her upstairs to what was now their bedroom. The room had been transformed in preparation for their marriage, a new, larger bed with a handsome quilt, fresh curtains at the windows, a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. "When did you do all this?" she asked, touching the quilt's intricate pattern. "I had help," he admitted. "Martha Davis organized it while we were at the church today, a wedding surprise." Josephine was touched by the thoughtfulness of her new friends. "It's beautiful." Garrett moved behind her, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "You're beautiful," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the nape of her neck. The simple touch sent shivers down her spine. She turned in his arms, finding the courage to meet his gaze directly. "I may not know exactly what I'm doing," she said softly, but I know that I want to be your wife in every sense of the word." The vulnerability in her admission seemed to touch something deep within him. His kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, yet still mindful of her inexperience. His hands remained respectfully at her waist until she guided them to the buttons at the back of her dress. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her lips. "I'm sure," she replied. With reverent care, Garrett helped her out of her wedding finery, his eyes darkening with desire as each layer was removed. His own clothing followed until they stood before each other as nature intended, both vulnerable and trusting. What followed was a tender exploration, Garrett guiding her with gentle patience through the initial discomfort to unexpected pleasure. In his arms, Josephine discovered aspects of herself she had never known existed, passion and desire that matched his own, a physical communion that deepened the emotional bond already forming between them. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Josephine felt a profound sense of rightness. This man, this life was what she had been seeking, even when she didn't know it. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes life's detours lead to better destinations than the ones we planned," she replied. He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "Philosophy after lovemaking." "You are a remarkable woman, Josephine Palmer." She smiled at the name, no longer foreign but fitting perfectly. "And you are a remarkable man who waited at a train station for a bride no one wanted, only to claim her as your own." "Best impulsive decision I ever made," he said, tightening his arms around her. "I'm glad you made it," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his chest directly over his heart. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, witnesses to the beginning of a partnership that had started with an act of compassion and evolved into something neither had expected to find in the wild territory of Wyoming love, profound and enduring. The seasons turned, summer heat giving way to autumn's crisp mornings and golden afternoons. Josephine settled fully into her role as Garrett's wife and partner in running Palmer Ranch. She had declined the teaching position, choosing instead to focus on making their home and learning the business of cattle ranching. To her surprise, she found she had a head for figures and soon took over the bookkeeping from Garrett, who admitted with relief that it had never been his favorite task. She also expanded the kitchen garden into a proper vegetable patch, started keeping chickens, and even convinced Garrett to invest in 2 milk cows. "We're becoming practically self-sufficient," he observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "That's the idea," she replied, her fingers busy with knitting. "The less we need to purchase, the more profit we keep." Garrett smiled at her practical approach. "You've taken to ranch life better than I expected." "Did you think I would fail?" she asked, glancing up from her work. "No," he said thoughtfully, "but I thought you might find it lonely out here so far from town and other women." Josephine set her knitting in her lap. "I'm not lonely, Garrett. I have you the hands, regular visits to town, and soon we'll have someone else to keep us company." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Garrett's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" She nodded, unable to contain her smile. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're expecting a baby in the spring." Garrett was on his knees before her in an instant, his hands cradling her face. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" She asked, though his expression made the question unnecessary. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," he replied, pressing a fervent kiss to her lips. "I never thought. After the war, I never imagined I'd have a family of my own." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. What had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into deep love, and now they were creating a family together. "We'll need to prepare," Garrett said, his mind already racing ahead. "The nursery, supplies from town, perhaps we should hire a girl to help you with the housework," Josephine laughed, placing a finger over his lips. "We have months yet. Let's enjoy this moment before we start worrying about practicalities." He captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You're right, as usual." That night, as they lay together in their bed, Garrett's hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Both of you." It was the first time he had said the words so directly, though his actions had been demonstrating his love for months. Josephine turned in his arms to face him, "And I love you," she replied, "more than I ever thought possible." The winter of 1875-76 proved to be unusually harsh, with blizzards sweeping down from the mountains and temperatures dropping well below zero. Garrett and his men worked tirelessly to keep the cattle fed and sheltered, often returning to the house with ice forming in their beards and exhaustion evident in every line of their bodies. Josephine, now showing the gentle swell of her pregnancy, worried constantly about her husband's safety in the brutal conditions. Each morning as he left, she would press a lingering kiss to his lips, silently praying for his safe return. Despite the challenges, there was a special intimacy to the long winter evenings. With darkness falling early, they would spend hours by the fire, Garrett reading aloud from one of his books while Josephine worked on baby clothes. Sometimes they would simply talk, planning for the future, sharing memories, or discussing the day's events. It was during one such evening in late January that Garrett broached a subject that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch," he said, setting aside his book. "The Dawson property to the east is available. Old man Dawson passed last month and his sons have no interest in ranching. They're looking to sell before heading back east." Josephine looked up from the tiny shirt she was embroidering. "How much land are we talking about?" "About 200 acres, with good water access and grazing land. It would allow us to increase the herd significantly." "Can we afford it?" she asked practically. Garrett smiled at her directness. "I've been over the books. With the profit from last year's cattle drive and what I've put aside, we could make a fair offer." "Then I think we should do it," Josephine said without hesitation. "If we're going to build something for our child and perhaps more children in the future, we should think ahead." The pride in Garrett's eyes warmed her heart. "I'll ride into town tomorrow to speak with the bank." February brought a brief thaw, allowing Garrett to finalize the purchase of the Dawson property. The expansion meant more work, but also the promise of greater prosperity for their growing family. As spring approached, Josephine's condition became more pronounced. Dr. Miller visited the ranch monthly to check on her progress, pronouncing both mother and child to be in excellent health. "You're doing remarkably well for a first-time mother, Mrs. Palmer," he said during one such visit. "Just continue to get plenty of rest and nourishment, and nature will take its course." Garrett had become increasingly protective, limiting her household duties despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. He'd hired Sarah, a young woman from town, to help with the heavier work, leaving Josephine free to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. The nursery, once a spare bedroom, was transformed with a handcrafted crib Garrett had built himself. A rocking chair moved from the parlor, and curtains Josephine had sewn from soft flannel. A small bookshelf held children's stories ordered from Chicago, and a colorful quilt made by the women of the sewing circle draped over the side of the crib. "It's perfect," Josephine said as they stood together in the doorway, admiring their handiwork. "Our child will be surrounded by love." Garrett's arm tightened around her waist, just like its mother. April brought the renewal of life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, and the imminent arrival of their own child. Josephine felt both excitement and trepidation as her time drew near. Though Martha Davis and several other women had shared their experiences of childbirth, she couldn't help feeling nervous about the unknown. Garrett seemed to sense her unspoken fears. One evening, finding her standing in the nursery, lost in thought, he wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands cradling her swollen belly. "Everything will be fine," he murmured against her ear. "You're the strongest woman I know." She leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I'm not afraid for myself, I just want our baby to be healthy. With you as its mother, how could it be anything else?" The confidence in his voice bolstered her spirits. The baby, apparently impatient to join the world, arrived a week earlier than Dr. Miller had predicted. Josephine's labor began shortly after midnight on a clear, star-filled night. Garrett rode for the doctor and Martha Davis while Tom's wife, Alina, stayed with Josephine. By dawn, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Garrett's eyes as he paced the hallway outside their bedroom. When Dr. Miller finally invited him in, he approached the bed with reverence, his gaze fixed on the small bundle cradled in Josephine's arms. "Meet your son," she said softly, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Garrett sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought we might name him James," Josephine suggested. "After your brother," Garrett looked up, his eyes shining. "You would do that, of course, and Thomas for his middle name after my brother, James Thomas Palmer." "James Thomas Palmer," Garrett repeated, testing the name. "It's a fine name for a fine boy." He leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you," he murmured. "For him, for everything." The first months of parenthood were a blur of sleepless nights, tender moments, and adjustments to their daily routines. Josephine discovered reserves of energy she hadn't known she possessed, managing the household and caring for baby James with grace that impressed even Martha Davis, a mother of 5. Garrett proved to be a devoted father, often carrying James in a sling across his chest while he worked around the ranch yard, talking to the infant as if he were a grown man who could understand every word. The sight never failed to make Josephine's heart swell with love. Summer brought the busiest season on the ranch, with cattle to be rounded up for the drive to Cheyenne. For the first time since their marriage, Garrett would be away for more than a day, leaving Josephine and James at the ranch with Tom and Alina for protection. The night before his departure, they stood on the porch after putting James to bed, the warm evening air fragrant with wildflowers. "I don't like leaving you," Garrett admitted, his arm around her waist. "We'll be fine," Josephine assured him. "Tom and Alina will be here, and town is just an hour's ride if we need anything." Still, 2 weeks is a long time to be apart. She turned to face him, linking her hands behind his neck. "Then you'll just have to make it up to me when you return." His eyebrow arched at her teasing tone. "Is that a promise, Mrs. Palmer?" "Most definitely, Mr. Palmer," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. The kiss deepened quickly, passion flaring between them as it always did. Since James's birth, their intimate moments had been fewer but no less intense. If anything, the shared experience of parenthood had deepened their connection in ways neither had anticipated. Garrett lifted her into his arms, carrying her inside and up the stairs to their bedroom, where he proceeded to show her exactly how much he would miss her during their separation. Later, lying contentedly in his arms, Josephine traced the scar on his shoulder, a remnant from the war that had brought him west and eventually to her. "Come back to us safely," she murmured. "Always," he promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Nothing could keep me from returning to you and James." The cattle drive departed at dawn, with Josephine and James standing on the porch to wave goodbye. The sight of Garrett riding at the head of his men, tall and proud in the saddle, made her chest tighten with both pride and longing. The days of his absence passed slowly despite her busy schedule. She threw herself into household tasks, garden work, and caring for James, who grew more alert and engaging by the day. His smile, so like his father's, never failed to brighten her darkest moments. Martha Davis visited twice, bringing news from town and welcome adult conversation. During her second visit, she broached a subject that caught Josephine by surprise. "The town council is still hoping you might reconsider teaching," she said as they sat in the parlor, watching James play on a blanket at their feet. "Miss Henderson's replacement isn't working out as well as hoped. She's finding the children too robust for her Eastern sensibilities." Josephine considered the possibility. With James almost 6 months old, the idea of resuming some form of her own pursuits was appealing. "I'm not sure Garrett would approve of me taking on work outside the home," she said thoughtfully. Martha smiled knowingly. "From what I've seen, that husband of yours approves of whatever makes you happy. Besides, it would only be a few hours each day. Surely Alina could watch James during that time." "I'll discuss it with Garrett when he returns," Josephine promised, already turning the idea over in her mind. 2 weeks to the day after his departure, Garrett returned, riding ahead of his men and the chuck wagon. Josephine heard the hoofbeats and rushed onto the porch, James in her arms, her heart leaping at the sight of her husband approaching. Garrett dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward them with a smile that erased the weariness evident in his dust-covered appearance. He enfolded them both in his arms, pressing kisses to James's head, and then capturing Josephine's lips in a kiss that spoke volumes about how much he had missed them. "Welcome home," she said when they finally parted, her cheeks flushed with pleasure. "The best words I've heard in 2 weeks," he replied, taking James into his arms. The baby gurgled happily, recognizing his father despite the separation. That evening, after a celebratory dinner with the Hands and their families, Garrett and Josephine sat on the porch swing, James sleeping peacefully upstairs. "The drive was successful?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Very got top dollar for the beeves. We'll be able to make those improvements to the east pasture we discussed." Josephine nodded, pleased by the news but distracted by the conversation she wanted to have. Garrett, attuned to her moods after nearly a year of marriage, noticed her hesitation. "What's on your mind, Joe?" he asked, using the pet name he'd adopted in their most private moments. "Martha Davis visited while you were gone," she began. "The school is still in need of a teacher. Apparently, Miss Henderson's replacement isn't working out." Garrett was silent for a moment, considering. "And you're interested in the position?" "I think I might be," she admitted. "Not full-time, at least not while James is so young, but perhaps a few hours each day. Elena has offered to watch him." "You miss teaching," he observed. It wasn't a question. "I miss the feeling of contributing something beyond our home," she clarified. "Not that raising James and managing the household isn't important work, it is. But I trained as a teacher before coming west, and I believe I could do some good." Garrett took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "If it's what you want, you have my full support. I've never wanted a wife who felt constrained by her role." Relief and gratitude washed over her. "Really, you wouldn't mind?" "Mind having a wife who's respected for her intelligence and dedication to the community, who sets an example of service for our son," he smiled warmly. "I'd be proud, Joe, proud and grateful that you chose to share your life with me." Josephine leaned in to kiss him, her heart full. "How did I get so fortunate?" "I ask myself the same question every day," he murmured against her lips. The school board readily accepted Josephine's offer to teach 3 mornings a week, with the possibility of expanding her role as James grew older. By September, she had settled into a routine that allowed her to balance her responsibilities at home with her work in town. To her delight, she found she had a natural talent for engaging even the most reluctant students. The children responded to her firm but kind approach, and parents began to comment on their children's improved interest in learning. Garrett, true to his word, supported her completely, even building a small desk in the corner of his office where she could prepare lessons in the evenings. He would often watch her work, a proud smile playing at his lips. "What?" she asked one such evening, catching his gaze. "Just thinking about how far we've come," he replied. "A year ago you stepped off that train with nowhere to go, now look at us." Indeed, their lives had transformed in ways neither could have predicted that fateful day at the Promise Creek station. From a desperate act of charity had grown a partnership built on respect and deepening love, a family expanding with the addition of James, and a ranch flourishing under their joint care. The following spring brought new calves, a bountiful garden, and the unexpected but welcome news that their family would grow once again. James, now walking and beginning to form words, would become a big brother by winter. "Are you happy about this?" Josephine asked as they lay in bed, Garrett's hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Happier than I can say," he assured her, "though I'll worry about you even more this time with teaching and caring for James." "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "Perhaps I should take a leave from the school until after the baby arrives." Garrett propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "Only if that's what you want. We could hire more help around the house, or I could arrange my schedule to be home more." His willingness to adapt his own life to accommodate her desires touched her deeply. "Let's see how I feel as the pregnancy progresses. For now, I'm managing well," he nodded, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." As summer turned to fall and Josephine's pregnancy advanced, the decision was made for her. Complications arose that required more rest than her teaching schedule allowed, and with reluctance, she informed the school board that she would need to step away until after the baby's birth. Garrett, ever attentive, adjusted his own routine to be more present at home, delegating ranch tasks to Tom and the other hands whenever possible. His concern for her welfare was touching, if occasionally smothering. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," she reminded him one afternoon when he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that she was perfectly capable of managing. "Humor me," he replied with a sheepish smile. "I can't help worrying about you." She softened, recognizing the love behind his overprotectiveness. "I know, and I appreciate your concern, but promise me you won't neglect the ranch because of it." "The ranch will be fine," he assured her. "You and the children are what matter most." The birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Martha Palmer, came during the first snowfall of December 1877. Unlike James's relatively straightforward delivery, Elizabeth's arrival was prolonged and difficult, leaving Josephine exhausted and Garrett frantic with worry when Dr. Miller finally emerged from the bedroom with news that mother and daughter were both well. Garrett nearly collapsed with relief. James, not quite understanding the situation but sensing its importance, patted his father's knee comfortingly from his perch on Tom's lap. "They're asking for you," the doctor said with a tired smile. Garrett entered the bedroom to find Josephine pale but radiant, a tiny bundle with a shock of dark hair cradled against her breast. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. He approached with reverence, taking in the perfect miniature features of their child. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "like her mother." "I thought we might name her Elizabeth after your mother," Josephine suggested. "And Martha for her middle name, after Martha Davis, who's been such a friend to us." Garrett nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak for a moment. "Perfect," he finally managed. "A perfect name for a perfect girl." James, allowed in to meet his sister under Alina's watchful eye, regarded the baby with solemn curiosity before declaring, "Baby," with decisive certainty that made the adults laugh. The following spring, as Promise Creek bloomed with new life, the Palmers celebrated their second wedding anniversary. So much had changed in those 2 years. Their ranch had expanded, their family had grown, and the tentative partnership formed at a train station had deepened into an unshakable bond. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching James chase fireflies while Elizabeth slept in Josephine's arms, Garrett reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I've been thinking about that day at the station," he said. "How close I came to not being there." Josephine looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I almost sent Tom in my place," he admitted. "I had work to do on the north fence line. It was Sheriff Davis who insisted I go myself, said it was the decent thing to do." "I never knew that," she said softly. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been there, if someone else had met you, or worse, if no one had come at all." Josephine shifted Elizabeth to her other arm, considering, "I like to think we would have found each other anyway, perhaps at church or in town." "Maybe," Garrett agreed, "but I'm grateful it happened the way it did, that I was there to claim you when no one else wanted to." "As am I," she replied, her eyes reflecting the love that had grown between them. "Though I think you got more than you bargained for a wife, 2 children, and a schoolteacher all in one package." Garrett laughed, the sound joining the chorus of night insects and distant cattle. "Best bargain I ever made." As the stars emerged above Palmer Ranch, Josephine leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the desperate leap of faith taken by both of them 2 years earlier had led to a happiness neither had dared to imagine. What had begun as an act of compassion at a train station had blossomed into a love story neither of them had been looking for, but both had been needing a testament to the unexpected ways in which life's most difficult moments could lead to its greatest blessings. In the years that followed, Palmer Ranch prospered, as did the family that called it home. Garrett and Josephine welcomed a third child, a son they named William, in 1880. James grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's love of learning. Elizabeth inherited Josephine's auburn hair and Garrett's determined spirit, while young William combined the best qualities of both parents with a sunny disposition entirely his own. Josephine eventually returned to teaching, establishing a reputation as one of the territory's finest educators. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, she was appointed to the State Education Board, a position she held with distinction for many years. Garrett expanded the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the county, known for fair dealings and progressive practices. He served on the town council and later as county commissioner, his integrity and practical wisdom earning him the respect of the entire community. Through it all, their partnership remained the foundation upon which everything else was built, a union formed in unusual circumstances but strengthened by shared values, mutual respect, and a love that deepened with each passing year. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes sit on the same porch where they had begun their life together, watching their children play or later, observing the comings and goings of grandchildren who filled the house with laughter and new life. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked on one such evening, decades after that fateful day at the train station. "Stepping off that train to find your intended gone and a stranger claiming you instead." Josephine, her auburn hair now streaked with silver but her green eyes as bright as ever, reached for his hand. "Not for a single moment. Everything I came west hoping to find, I found with you, just not in the way I expected. Funny how life works out," he mused, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "I went to that station out of duty, not knowing I was riding toward my future. And I stepped off that train thinking my journey was ending, when it was really just beginning," she added, squeezing his hand. The Wyoming sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, much as it had on countless evenings throughout their life together. In the distance, the silhouettes of cattle dotted the landscape of the ranch they had built together, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. "I love you, Josephine Palmer," Garrett said simply, the words carrying the weight of decades shared. "And I love you," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "My cowboy who waited at the station for a bride no one wanted, only to claim her as his own." He smiled at the familiar description, remembering the impulsive decision that had changed everything. "Best claim I ever staked," he said, drawing her close as the stars began to appear overhead, sentinels watching over the lives they had built from an unexpected beginning into a story of enduring love.